Good morning. Understanding the nature of our conditioning by Vimala Thakar. Biological and psychological conditioning. Let us look at the word conditionings. It is well known that we carry psychological and biological inheritance within us. That is, the strong or weak points of the parents and grandparents. According to the Occidental science of genetics, the inheritance goes back 3 generations. And according to the science of genetics, which is a part of the Vedas, the fifth of the Vedas, inheritance goes back to 5 generations. The biological, the chemical, the neurological, the glandular, the muscular assets or deficiencies. That is what we call the biological inheritance, and it's a part of the conditioning. You cannot destroy it, you cannot eliminate it. It is something which you have to live with. The only thing that one can do is recognize what it is and not carry a grudge about it, or there will be constant friction inside the heart. Along with the biological inheritance, there's also a psychological inheritance. We also inherit the tendencies, the aptitudes, the mental distortions, perversions, the greeds, the lust of our parents. So, according to the discoveries of science, every atom of our system carries the psychological inheritance, and we have to recognize this psychological inheritance, which is a part of our conditioning, works along with our consciousness. So there is conditioning, which is the result of absorbing, assimilating, accepting the knowledge, the ways of behavior of the society around us. And there are conditionings that are part of our psychological and biological inheritance. And apart from the family inheritance, there is a psychological and biological inheritance derived from whatever the human race does and has been doing for thousands of years. The collective unconscious, as Jung used to call it. So when the mind moves, these 3 things are moving together. What we have consciously assimilated, that which we have inherited from the family, the community, and also that which we have inherited from the total human race. We function through consciousness, which is self-conscious, which is conditioned by the past. The content of our consciousness, which we use in daily life, is the thought, the knowledge, the experiences, the conditionings. That is what we call patterns of behavior. When the consciousness moves, those patterns of conditionings and experiences are moving, and we have accepted them as the authority and identify ourselves with them, then the thought structure may not prove such an obstacle. If we accept the tendencies, the desires, the weaknesses contained in us as our nature and say, I'm angry by nature, it means we have accepted the authority of the inheritance of the conditionings that one has picked up while growing up. By accepting the authority, by identifying oneself with them and saying, This is my nature, and believing it is incurable and that it is not possible to set oneself free of them, we weave the fabric of bondage. Instead, we have to recognize them as conditionings and not identify with them. The first, the first step to take is to examine the mental movement, examine the anatomy and mechanism of the mind without accepting its authority or the authority of our reactions. I don't want this. I don't like this. I hate this. I love this. I'm mad. We accept the authority of our reactions, and so we get irritated, frustrated, and annoyed. We should realize these irritations, anger, jealousies, pettinesses of the mind are cerebral ways of behavior common to the whole humanity. They are neither yours nor mine. Object, objectify them and create a space between them and yourself and look at them sanely. So objectify them and create a space between them and yourself and look at them sanely, logically. Look at them and understand them. Understand that the perversions in desires, distortions in our behavior, all these, all these are mechanical movements, that they are movements of the past expressing themselves in us. And so it becomes possible not to accept the authority of the mechanical movement, not to identify with the physical and psychological ways of behavior that are fed into us, but to recognize them as conditionings. Examination, investigation, and then recognition of the fact is very important. Habits and conditionings. When we say the conditionings have been fed into us, what do we mean? Do we not imply that a demand has been made upon us to repeat a way of behavior day in and day out, year after year? And when you repeat an activity, it becomes a habit. Habits are built through repetition, repetition on the verbal, physical, and mental level. We create habits because when we repeat things, we do not have to be attentive. We do not have to make an effort to be alert or sensitive. You do physical work, and mentally you are wandering away, chattering within yourself, playing with the past, or worried about the future. Following habit patterns is a grave sickness because habits make you inattentive, and there is a split within you. The more you live out of these habits, the more you give in to repetitive mental and physical activity, and the more you are in a state of inattention. Conditioning and images. The third aspect of conditionings is that when I observe the movement of the mind, I build up an image of myself. As we build up habit patterns on the physical, verbal, mental level, we go on creating images of ourselves. I notice the repetition of certain emotions and sentiments, feelings, certain good points 10 times a day, and I create an image of myself. If I observe that I can write well, I create an image of myself that I'm a writer. There is a capacity to write, and out of that capacity, an abstraction is created. And I identify myself with that abstraction, and an image is built. Or we say, I'm a violent person, a rough person. We have seen roughness, anger moving through us. We identify with it and create an image of ourselves, in the same way that we create images about others. It is really important to see, at least verbally, how conditionings are created right from inheritance to the tendencies of the subconscious, to the conscious mind, where they are created voluntarily by ourselves. If we have seen how habit patterns and images are built up, the question arises, is there any other energy which has not been conditioned? The mind, the consciousness, is conditioned energy, and we have to use that energy. But how are we going to come about an unconditioned energy? The way is to let the conditioned mind go into abeyance. In silence, the vibrational movement discontinues itself, and the energy contained in space, uncluttered by those vibrations, gets activated. Next chapter, understanding the nature of concepts. The first concept to look into is time. Let us first understand why and how concepts and symbols came into existence. Why did the human race feel the necessity of creating a superstructure of concepts and symbols? Could it be because human beings did not wish to move in herds and groups, that they wanted to have a social life together? This self-conscious energy with which they were born created a compulsion from within to share life with one another, to create a society. And when you live together, you need words for communication. This is how they must have created languages, beginning with gestures, then sounds, and then words. But for communication, only words were not sufficient. So in order to facilitate collective behavior, they created concepts and symbols. They must have been confronted with the isness of life, and must have wondered how to relate with that isness, how to relate with eternity, the infinity of isness. And so they created a beautiful concept of what you call time. Psychological time. We have mornings, afternoons, evenings, days and nights, and still more concepts. Months, weeks, hours, minutes. But is there anything like psychological time in reality? I would like to remind you that psychological time is only conceptual reality. Psychological time has no physical reality. The physical reality at this hour of the day is that there is the sun. When we see the sun, we call it morning. So the presence of the sun or sunshine is a physical reality, and we call it morning. But that morning has only a conceptual reality. The physical reality is free of all concepts. We impose concepts upon reality, and since the concepts are also abstract, and we want something concrete, we create symbols. Thus we have created the watch, and say we are meeting at 9:30 a.m. But there's nothing like 9:30 a.m. in life. Life is timeless. The knowledge or the conditioned consciousness or thought is left behind. What does that result in? Does time accompany us? Is there time after the mental movement voluntarily goes into abeyance? Or is mind itself time? Have we come across any movement of the mind without time? Maybe the movement of time is the movement of the mind. As soon as the conditioned mind goes into non-action, time comes to a standstill. Time is not real. Time is in the human mind. When the mind moves, the time moves. And obviously, when the mind moves not, time comes to a standstill. Do you see that life is timelessness? It is neither time nor the symbol of time. If we can see that psychological time as only a conceptual reality and a symbolic reality, and we do not mistake it for the timelessness or time-freeness of reality, then further exploration will not be difficult. Then, while relating to the symbols, we will not lose communion with that which is immeasurable and timeless. Then, while we relate to the symbols of time, we will not lose communion with that which is immeasurable and timeless. Fear is the result of the acceptance of the authority of time. We have mistaken psychological time for the reality of life. Since childhood, we have been living with this concept of time, and we notice fear is related to tomorrow or to the next hour. If there's no idea of the next hour or day, no idea of the future, there might not be fear. Creating these authorities, clinging to the theories or persons, is also somehow related to this acceptance of time. We have been brought up with the idea of permanency and security through this permanency of time. We've been brought up and fed on the idea that there is continuity in time, and in that we find security. When psychological time is seen as a symbol, as a concept, and not as a reality, obviously there cannot be any idea of continuity. The idea of continuity has relevance to psychological time. Because we felt there was something like psychological time, we imagined continuity to be there, and we wanted to continue. And in the continuing, we thought there would be security. There is no continuity. And so security, it's a misprint, I think. There is no continuity and no security, but there is isness, devoid of all symbols and concepts. The perception of a simple fact that life is timelessness transforms our relationship with it. Then where is the need for any authority? Since there is no time through which we are going to travel towards eternity, and no God or divinity except through the movement of relationship to be reached. Let me read that again. The perception of a simple fact that life is timelessness transforms our relationship with it. Then where is the need for any authority? Since there is no time through which we are going to travel towards eternity, and no God or divinity, except through the movement of relationship to be reached. we become concerned with the act of living right now. Second concept, space. As the psychological time has no physical reality, it has only conceptual reality. So the idea of sequence and continuity is a creation of the mind. Along with the concept of time, or due to the concept of time, the idea of sequence crosses the mind. We imagine the cause and effect relationship. We imagine the past, the present, and the future, the before and the afterwards. And we imagine the here and there due to our idea of space. The idea of sequence and continuity is a creation of the mind. There is no sequence in the world. There's only simultaneity, simultaneousness. Life is a time-free and space-free reality. And in meditation, where the total mind does not move at all, time and space will be no more there. Then there comes the third concept, which is the ego. The basic thing to understand is that the ego, the I consciousness, is structured by the human race for the convenience of verbal communication. And there is in reality no I. The ego, like psychological time, is a contrivance. It was a center created for the convenience of cerebral movement. Don't we move all the time as the I, the me? Do we ever stop and ask ourselves, what is this I that I talk about at least 100 times a day? Is it the body, the black, the fair, the brown body, and its limitations or excellences? Is it the mind which has been trained in certain channels? What is the me? After all, is there anything like I? The self, the me of a child, of a young man, of an adult, of an old person, are they the same? Is it constant or is it changing all the time? A person goes through dozens of moods in a day, gets angry in one moment, sad the next, repents and weeps in the third. Which is the real person? What I'm trying to say is that maybe the very idea of the I is again a symbol, an amalgamation of identifications. Somebody says your name is this, and they call you half a dozen times by that name. You respond, and so you come to believe that you are so and so. Then you're told you're a Hindu or a Christian. You're different, you're smart. Nobody says your brain seems to be dull. They say you are dull, you are black or brown, etc. So identification from childhood goes on. The assemblage of identifications, the amalgamation of identifications becomes the center from which we perceive and out of which we respond. It is a contrivance rather than a reality. We have to understand, at least on the verbal level, that the ego is a contrivance, that it has only conceptual reality, that it has not an absolute reality. Though it's a very useful thing, compulsions Ah, so sorry. There's a the sentence didn't make sense, so there's a page missing. We go from page 76 to page 78, and we'll do our best to follow. Thought is a response of memory. The process of thinking is just digging responses from memory, and the content of memory is a result of the collective human effort through centuries. There is nothing like I or me in the movement of thought. If I'm calling myself a separate ego because of the movement of thought, am I justified in doing that? We feed information, knowledge into a computer, and the computer thinks, it deduces conclusions, it has a memory, it can respond. Do you presume that the computer has an identity, that it has an ego? You just accept it as a mechanical movement which has been copied from the cerebral movement of mankind. There you see very clearly that it can happen without the I consciousness, the ego consciousness. Why don't you realize that the cerebral movement taking place in this body, having its content conditioned by humanity, by mankind, has no separate point or ego or self or me, that it is something collective? I'm questioning the validity of presuming that there is a separate I consciousness. Separateness of the body is accepted to a certain extent as a relative truth, but whether it is necessary to presume a separate I consciousness because there is a movement of certain conditionings through the body is really a question we should ask ourselves. There's nothing like a particular mind. There is a stream of consciousness conditioned collectively, which gets expressed through you and me, through this person and that person, the thousands of persons. It is shocking, is it not, to realize that I don't have a mind of my own. The urge for security and the urge for continuity and survival are the result of this myth of a particular mind, of the existence of a separate ego and a self. The urge for security, for survival on the physical level, is part of the biological instinct, but we transfer the idea of security to the psychological level, and the I consciousness says, I must survive, I must endure, I need psychological security. You see, the urge for security, survival, which implies a fear of death, is just a transference of biological instincts to the psychological realm. Here the I consciousness tries to survive and continue through its likes and dislikes. The urge for continuity and survival has created an attitude of expectation from others that they should respond according to my likes. Then I'm happy that they should not do anything which I dislike, because then I will be unhappy. The I does create psychological needs which are human creations, unlike physical and biological needs, which are needs of the whole universe, which we share with everyone. If I see this as a psychological fact, then what happens to me? Do I any more worship my likes and dislikes? Do I make a capital out of my reactions to situations, to the behavior of people? Do I carry the hurt and the wound that takes place in human relationships from one moment to another? The reaction comes up. I see it as a mechanical movement. I see that it is not relevant to the situation. The reaction comes up. I see it as a mechanical movement. I see that it is not relevant to the situation. If the mechanical, repetitive movement of thought is something seen objectively, and we do not want to own that movement as our own, we do not want to possess it, then I think life becomes much more simple. You won't feel proud of your reactions. You do not create an image of yourself or of others based on the authority of your preferences and prejudices. Once you understand that the ego has no reality, then the desire for its continuity will not be there. You cannot destroy the desire, but by understanding the nature of the I consciousness, the nature of the ego as fictitious, then there is no desire for the continuity of the ego. This is the foundation. I have to see what the ego is, so there is no fear that the ego remains and is sustained. By understanding its falsity, my identification with that contrivance is over, and I don't worry about what happens to it. A kind of freedom then comes about. Okay, till so far, this book of Vimala. So I will continue tomorrow. I hope you have a great day. Bye.